Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Field Crop Virtual Breakfast. Thanks for joining early. My name is Eric Anderson. I'm the soybean educator for MSU Extension. I'll be hosting today. So up first this morning is Dr. Marty Chilvers. He's our field crop pathologist, and he's going to be talking about white mold and tar spot spraying, which is very timely because we're right in flowering or maybe even just past flowering in soybean. And we're just talking about we've got some fields that are already at tasseling and silking, so very timely. So, Marty, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and you can take it away.
All right. Thanks, Eric. Okay. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Yeah. So let's chat about white mold and tar spot management. And please pop your questions down and we'll get to those. So let's start off chatting about white mold then, or sclerotinia stem rot, as it's otherwise known. So a few factors to consider in terms of management. We need to really think about field history. Has there been a history of disease in the field, which will mean that there will be a sclerotia load in that field that can give rise to the apothecia or white mold mushrooms that result in white mold disease. Variety susceptibility is a really important component too. Everything is susceptible to some degree, but understanding where things sit on the scale is really helpful. Canopy closure, if we're in tight rows or high plant populations, that's an additional risk factor. High fertility levels as well, and then moisture events during flowering and cool temperatures. And just a reminder that it's a two-step process. We need to have those apothecia be produced, and then we need infection of the plants from spores that are produced. So just really briefly, we do a lot of research on white mold, and a lot of the trials we do are up at the Montcalm Research Station. We plant intentionally in 15-inch rows. This allows us to get canopy closure relatively early, creating ideal conditions. It's irrigated, so in dry years, we're able to push water and screen those varieties, biologicals or fungicides for management. So variety resistance, this slide tells a couple of stories. It tells you how much 1 year to the next can really affect the amount of white mold that we see just due to conditions. And so what we're looking at here is the yield on this y-axis here and the amount of white mold along that x-axis. So of course, the more disease we see, the less yield that we're able to
Test, 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 test.
take
Let's
off.
test.
We can hear you, Jeff. And so the other point I really wanted to make here is like within these years, 2021, there was about a 25 bushel difference between the most susceptible and the most resistant variety, just on selecting variety, no other management practice. That difference was less in 2022. We had a lot more disease pressure. There was still about a 16 bushel difference. So no fungicide, just with respect to the selection of varieties. So again, variety selection is really important. And if we can only target, if we know we may have a chance of white mold and we can only target a few fields, maybe think about those fields that have more susceptible variety that's growing in them. All right, so we've run so many about close to 15 years or maybe more than 15 years of fungicide trials for white mold now. So many trials. It's kind of challenging to summarize all of that. So I just picked a couple just as sort of talking points. So what we're looking at here, I've arranged these different treatments by the yield in blue and the amount of white mold disease in red. So Endura is kind of one of our gold standards in terms of really good disease suppression and yield protection. So you can see that sort of rising to the top here of the different treatments that we checked out. We've got our untreated check down here. And I think what I really want to emphasize here is product selection is very important for white mold. So Miravis Neo might be fine if we're just trying to protect from other foliar diseases, but it's not a good product for white mold management. We've got multiple years of data to demonstrate that. It's a Syngenta product, but Syngenta own Omega, and that's a good product to use. So be very aware when you're making a selection of fungicides for white mold management. Select products that will do something for you. The other thing that we've used quite a bit is Cobra, either right about a week before flowering or sometimes at the R1 growth stage. And often that performs just as well as our Endura, our gold standard fungicide treatment. So just wanted to share that, reiterate that. We've got some fungicide efficacy charts that we'll share with you, some links, and here's a snapshot of that. So we review these and update these every year based on new products that come out and additional trial data that we collect. Actually, right at the moment, we're going through another, what we call a meta-analysis. So pulling together what we've done in Michigan, but Wisconsin and other states, and that's being put together in a larger analysis to give us more power to really understand what products are working well in many locations. So I'm very excited to see that coming together. But anyway, again, products rated as good or very good. Here's that list of those products. So Endura, Approach in a 2-pass system, Omega, Repulse rather, and Cobra. Fungicide timing is really important. So we can take that Endura product that we see as, being a very, very good product at suppressing white mold. We sprayed at that R4 growth stage, and it does very, very little for white mold management. So timing is critical. So it's really important to understand we need to make these fungicide applications during flowering, somewhere between R1, the beginning of flowering, through to the beginning of pod development. And so, or into the pod development. So once we hit that R4 growth stage, then that's too late. So to determine where we're at, we need to go down to the 4th node. So we count down leaves that are expanded and not touching anymore to find that 4th node. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Down here is our 4th node. And what we're looking at for an R3 soybean plant, at that 4th node, the pod is 3/16 of an inch long. But as soon as it gets to 3/4 of an inch long, then we're now into the R4 growth stage. And the fungicides are just not going to do anywhere near as much as they did in that R1 to R3 application window. So just a really important thing to think about. You can waste a lot of money if you're making these applications at the wrong time. So please be aware. And once you see white mold developing in the canopy, it's generally pretty much too late to have good suppression of white mold. So we've got to be proactive using those risk factors and risk tools. So you might be asking, where did Sporecaster go? So we used to have the app on the phone. We could pull it up and check our risk. That's gone away due to funding issues and whatnot. Anyway, so what we have done, what I'm kind of excited about, is that a lot of these different models have been collected together on the Crop Protection Network website. So for soybeans, we have both a white mold model that's running and even a frog eye leaf spot model that's quite new that we're playing around with at the moment and just validating. So the white mold model is the same algorithm that was powering Sporecaster. And you can see this is the Lansing location that I pulled up. We were at high risk in early June, and now that risk has really dropped off. And this is pulling in temperature and moisture components into that risk forecasting. You can see frog eye leaf spots increased a little bit. Frog eye is quite fine with warmer temperatures. Anyway, so at this website as well, you can drop a whole bunch of pins around the state and go in and check, run the model and see how the model is performing. And with respect to that meta-analysis that we're doing, where we have a very new fungicide return on investment calculator for white mold. We don't have all the products out there at the moment, but there's a number of products that are listed out. So you can go in, type in your estimated yield potential, price per bushel that you expect to get. And you can also play around with the disease severity to have a look at the likelihood of return on investment. And that's based on all that university data that we've been pulling together. Okay, let's switch gears to tar spot and some thoughts there about management. So just really briefly, I've been getting quite a few pictures being sent through to me and questions about identifying tar spot. I'm sure most of you are fairly familiar, but every year, especially early on, we get quite a few suspect tar spot, and it turns out not to be tar spot. So don't be fooled, I guess. Please send me images. There'll be certain characteristics I'll be looking for, drawing along the leaf veins. and typically a little bit of a yellow or brown sort of halo around that tar spot, and then flip the leaf over and it should generally be protruding through. You can be fooled with early grey leaf spot or maybe anthracnose lesions, but they shouldn't have that raised structure to them. But anyway, let me know if you have any questions. This is what we have in terms of confirmations. So really, most of the confirmations came in mid last week, and a couple more just sort of trickling through this week as well. So it's not super early for Michigan. We had some slightly earlier findings in Indiana. I do want to back up and just chat about last year quickly. So last year in Kansas and probably Indiana, I think we had some pretty early detections, and they didn't really result in any significant damage. Temperatures just got too warm and it shut down that tar spot, and it just didn't blow up like we have seen in some of those epidemic years. So just because it's there doesn't mean it's going to take off and do a lot of damage. Of course, we want to be cautious, do a good job at scouting and being prepared. But detection doesn't always mean that, disaster. So really quickly, that life cycle, it's coming from residue. Even if you've managed that residue, it can be coming in from outside. I would not recommend doing anything to actually manage that residue. I think it's such a small component. Yes, it's important, but you can't do anything about the residue, around you. It's going to blow in at some point. And it takes about 2 to 3 weeks to cycle for every cycle to happen. So if we get cool, wet conditions, then that can, continue cycling through the season. And the earlier that starts, the greater the problems we have. So typically, if detections are happening in August, generally that's not as big a deal. If we have detections happening in July and it starts to build early in July, then that can be definitely far more serious. So pulling up the tar spot model today for tar spot. So this is exactly the same algorithm that was running in Tar Spotter. Again, the app that we did have, now it's on the Crop Protection Network website. The risk has really dropped off. And so those warm temperatures have really squashed the risk, if you will, for tar spot. So it prefers cooler temps. If we see a return of cooler temperatures, then that risk will start to increase again. A new model that we have up there is grey leaf spot. Grey leaf spot certainly prefers warmer conditions, so that is showing a higher risk. Okay. And so that map I was just showing, that county level map of tar spot, just because your county is lit up doesn't mean that you should go out and spray. It means you should get out and scout your fields and be aware of what is going on. And so now we're hitting that tassel growth stage that sort of changes the way we think about things a little bit. Pretty much any early vegetative fungicide application timings are just too early for good control of tar spot. If you make a vegetative application, more than likely you're going to have to come back with a second application. What we tend to see over most years is that a single application somewhere between R1 to R3 growth stage, maybe into R4, is an ideal timing, depending on when disease is really starting to set up. So if you had all the freedom in the world, had your own equipment and can spray when you want to spray and don't see any tar spot, and you only want to make one application this season, I would be waiting a little bit. I would wait potentially to R2, R3, and then pull the trigger if disease was there, or if I wanted to make that application anyway. I wouldn't necessarily jump the gun and go pre-tassel. So think about that. So we put this chart together, and again, this comes up when you search in the Crop Protection Network and look for the map of tar spot. Just a decision guide about, what should we be thinking about depending on the growth stage. So R5, generally I would say it's pretty unlikely you're going to see a return on investment at the R5 growth stage, but there's been instances where it can happen. And certainly if you make an application at R5, you're not going to need a second application. That would be a waste of money. And certainly at R6, then, corn is done. We're not continuing to fill that grain anymore, so don't spray beyond that. Darcy Telenko at Purdue, my colleague down there, did a really nice job summarizing, I think, 3 or 4 years here, our 2019 to 2021 data. So looking at different timings of fungicide application and the net return, which is shown here in green, based on those different timings. Of course, this is going to vary depending on how much disease comes in where. I think she had reasonable disease pressure in these locations, so that factors into the economics here of the protection and return on investment. Essentially, though, over those multiple years, she was seeing a good return on investment, R1 through to R3 and R4, and really starting to drop off once they hit that dent growth stage. Again, under certain circumstances, yes, the beginning of dent, sometimes we've seen that 20 bushel protection, but generally it's really between the R1 and R3 where is our best timed window from a single application. And we also have a fungicide return on investment calculator. So what we've done is pulled a bunch of pricing information that's been sent into us and pre-populated things, but you need to fill out this sheet and change those numbers around based on what you can get products for. So this is, you still need to play around with this sheet if you want to use it and see how things might compare. You can, again, put in your expected yield, commodity price, and then product price, run the calculator, and use that university data to get a sense of how things might play out. Anyway, so a helpful tool. Please leave check strips. I think it's really helpful to learn what is happening. It doesn't need to be the length of the field. It just needs to be enough to run through the combine to get a sense of how did that fungicide application work out for us. I was just speaking to a colleague here in Michigan earlier today or yesterday, and they have a drone, and so they don't have much task spots. This is a great opportunity to run strips at different times, perhaps, to look at what is the best time to get that product on in their own field. I think that's a good opportunity there to learn. Okay, so just really briefly then, so risk factors, that hybrid is really a very important thing. I think we've done a very good job at removing the very susceptible material out of the lineup. But again, pay attention, speak to your seed people about, the susceptibility or tolerance to task spot. The weather is going to play a big effect here, especially cool temperatures. That's important, very, very important, even more important than leaf moisture. And then scout for well-timed fungicide applications. Don't just rely on that map. Get out into your own fields and see what's going on. If we do have task spots set up, we need to be looking for a lodging potential. And certainly don't forget about other diseases. Crop rotations are very minimal factor here, and same with residue management. So with that, I just want to finish on red crown rot of soybean. Please be paying attention for red crown rot this season. So this is a very new disease to the Midwest. It's been in the South since the 60s on peanut and soybean. But for some reason, we've seen it pop up in Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, Kentucky. So here's the current map. It's not confirmed in Michigan yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's here. So it exhibits very much like soybean sudden death syndrome symptoms in terms of foliar. So don't be fooled. Please check. What we're looking for is any of these red fruiting bodies on that lower portion of the stem or reddening inside the tissue. The only thing I think we can get tricked with, or one of the things, is white mold. On white mold infected plants, you may see sort of a reddening. That's a response from the plant. But you should be able to tell that it's white mold because you break that open, you'll see the sclerotia from that white mold infection. So anyway, please pay attention to this. We want to get on top of this as soon as we can. I think it is going to be quite a headache for us, unfortunately. It's done a lot of damage in some of these fields already. And with that, I'll leave it there.
We've got a couple questions already. So, um, so Marty, for both diseases, for white mold and tar spot, you mentioned cool and wet, but what is the ideal temperature range for seeing these blow up?
Yeah. So So I think one of the things here to distinguish as well is that white mold is a pretty defined window, right, around flowering. So we're looking at monthly averages 70 degrees thereabouts. I think once we hit 80 and above, the risk drops off pretty considerably. It's probably somewhat similar for task, but it's a response curve. So the cooler it is, the more likely we are to have issues. Um, and so, yeah, those cooler 70-degree days, cool nights, that's definitely going to push things along for sure. So 80s and above, warm nights, it's going to slow things down in general.
Okay. So for tar spot, how far can these spores travel?
Yeah, I mean, we think many miles based on how quickly it progressed. It was first found northern Illinois, Indiana, and tracking it, it was moving every year. It was moving, tens, if not hundreds of miles. So it looks like, many miles. The spores are probably somewhat sunlight sensitive, but if we have the right conditions, it seems like those spores can travel and be viable. And the thing is, it doesn't matter now anyway, at least in Michigan, because we have infected residue everywhere. So I wouldn't worry about it. Just be prepared to treat if it's in your field.
And the spores that you're referring to, you're not talking about the spores that are in the residue during that first cycle. It's more as it starts to climb up the plant that
Right.
as the spores are reduced, they
Yeah,
catch the wind.
that's a very good point, Eric. So, yes, so we've done some till no till trials, and that's been really interesting. So, over the years, we have seen that in that no till where we've got a lot of residue, yeah, we see a little bit more tar spots start a little bit earlier, but that pales in significance compared to the hybrid susceptibility. So, that more susceptible hybrid gets so much more tar spot than the resistant variety. This last year, we actually saw that things flip around. So in the tilled area, we got more tar spot. So I think it's because the canopy was developing much more so in that tilled area versus the no-till. And we saw the same thing in Wisconsin. It wasn't just a one-off here in Michigan, but the same response. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it's only a little bit of inoculum that needs to sort of start the tar spot, and then we get those cycling conditions, and it can produce many thousands of spores per each lesion. And you're not no reason to freak out. You have one lesion in your field, don't freak out. Be on the ball in terms of scouting. I do believe that you can probably wait until you're close to maybe 50% of plants with infection, but that does not mean driving by and seeing it from the truck. If you can do that, then it's too late. We need to we should have sprayed earlier. But if you're really paying attention, you don't need to spray at first lesion, but as things begin to develop, I think if you're going for a single fungicide application, that's what I would be shooting for.
So Marty, back to white mold. I know in the past you've talked a little bit about sprayer setup. This question is talking about the angle of the spray nozzles to get up under the canopy for white mold. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, Julius, it's an interesting question. So there's been a few different studies that have been done. So not so much angled nozzles. So we really think about that when we're trying to control head scab in wheat, trying to do a good job at covering that entire head when we're going through. For white mold, we're trying to get product down into the canopy. So not necessarily angled nozzles. Our colleague up in North Dakota has seen that maybe slightly larger droplets to get some sort of penetrating force down into the canopy, maybe helping get improved control of white mold. My colleague in Wisconsin has been running drop nozzles through 30-inch soybeans. So of course, you probably can't do that in 15s. We've thought about in our trial situation, but he was seeing much better performance from Omega in soybeans when he was able to run those drop nozzles. So that's also due to the way Omega works. It's more of a contact type fungicide. And so getting it down where it really needs to be made that product really, really perform quite well. So anything you can do, yes. And drone applications can certainly work. Again, it's about getting product down into the canopy. And so, yeah, drones are also can be successful, and there's some data out there now to show that can work quite well too. Looks like Mark Seaman had a question there about adequate soil moisture for apothecia growth, but temperatures are somewhat high. So can I provide some comments about that? Yeah, that's a good question, Mark. So what we're seeing, so here is the risk tools that I was talking about. Oh, actually, I'm not sharing my screen, am I? Do that real quick. So again, I was sharing with you guys the risk tools that we have. And so here's the risk tool pulled up on that crop protection network website. Go in under tools, crop risk tool, orient yourself into that, and you can have a look through here. So I've just dropped some pins around the state here to track through and see how different things are panning out. So looking at Lansing, the risk has dropped off, and no doubt that's probably temperature driven, given that we've got moisture. It's probably that temperature element there that's dropped off that risk. But we're seeing low risk in Lansing, Bad Axe, need more, across the state. It's showing relatively low risk. So I would say that we're still going to get some pockets of white mold for sure, but overall we're not sitting at a high level this particular season. So again, in terms of making that fungicide spray decision, well, if you've been battling white mold most years in those fields or every second year as you rotate in, I'd probably still consider a fungicide application. That these models are there to help us make decisions, but if you know you've got a pretty consistent problem, I would probably be thinking about managing it. So it's just part of the puzzle in terms of management.
Thanks, Marty. This is probably more of, I guess, a comment than a question. This is for Jeff. Charles is saying, great job. I just wanted to mention that you're using for the GDD calculations March 1 as a start date. He says that if you use May 1 as a start date, we actually still look to be a little behind the 5-year average.
Just to jump in here. Thanks for the comment. I like to have the totals also from May 1st. Those for other technological problems are not available here this morning. But even with the May 1 dates, most of the state, we do see surpluses with the 8650-degree days. It's not large, but it's still a little bit of a surplus. In the far northern part of the state, we do have some areas that are at or a little bit behind.
Marty, another question for you. For a gray leaf spot for that model, can you talk about the strengths and the limitations of that?
Sure. It's a newer model. I'm just racking my brain trying to remember what I know about it, but it's a newer model. I think one of the important things is too, just because if the model is showing risk for something like gray leaf spot as I was showing, I think you need to ask yourself, have you had gray leaf spot in the past? If you've never had gray leaf spot, it might not be an issue for you. Of course, if you've changed hybrids and somehow you're now growing a very susceptible hybrid and we happen to have gray leaf in that area, sure, that's going to be a problem for you. So I think that's a limitation with any model. There's a whole bunch of taskbot models coming out, from all the various chemistry and seed companies. And yeah, that's great. But I think what we really need to do is go back to basics too. And they're based on the weather data that's happening. They're not incorporating pathogen presence for the most part, actual disease presence in the field. So going out and scouting, I think, is really, really important. So some of these models are somewhat newer, and I think this gray leaf spot is pretty new. It's going to get better over time too as we collect more data and find any failures. And we'd love to hear from you too if you feel that the model is, it's always nice to hear good feedback too. If it is performing well, great, let us know. But just as important, if you feel like we really had a miss, please let us know, because that's really helpful for us to help refine these models.
Steve's got a question. Steve's over in the west central part of the state, talking about the variance in precipitation. As Jeff was showing, it's really true across most of the state. Some growers get little to nothing during storms or rain events. Others get multiple inches. And do you have any advice for growers who are struggling with balancing applications, with these different amounts of rainfall?
Sure. I mean, I think we need to maybe ask ourselves why we're making the applications and what we're trying to manage. Like I said, for white mold, we really have to be in that early flowering or that R1, sorry, through to R3 growth stage. Going later than that, you're really going to see a pretty big drop off in efficacy. So you might need to ask yourself that question if you are getting into later growth stages. For something like tar spot, there's still plenty of time, so I wouldn't panic. Again, I would be out there scouting the fields, getting an idea of what is happening. So yeah, I think you've got to do what you can, I guess, with those challenges. There was a question too about oh, just blanked. I had it. Oh yeah, insecticide. Chris could certainly weigh in on this in terms of potentially Western mean cutworm, I guess I'm thinking of in corn. Um, and I think Chris would generally say yes if there's risk of Western mean cutworm, and you know that there's presence of egg masses, it'd be fine to put that insecticide in with that fungicide out there. Chris, do you want to have any comment
Yeah,
on
I
that?
mean, you already talked about scouting. So the key is scouting. Right now, we aren't at peak egg deposition. I haven't found any eggs yet. That Western bean's really the only thing I can think of that you might want to add something to the fungicide. I don't see any physical reason that you can't do it. It's just if there's nothing there, I don't see a reason to do it. You might flare spider mite, or you might, we don't want to create many resistance issues. So if you need to, sure, but scout and make sure that you have the pest before you do something.
So, Chris, as long as we got you on here, I had a report come in earlier this week with the hotter temperatures of spider mites in some soybean fields. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, spider mites will typically start along the edges of fields. I haven't been somewhere, every place I've been has been pretty wet, so I haven't seen that. But to the west of Lansing, there are areas that haven't had a lot of rain. Spider mites are typically a losing kind of proposition because you get one spray. Remember, if you spray a pyrethroid, except for bifenthrin, those can actually flare mites. There's a lot of predators out there that eat mites. So once you remove them, the mites can very rapidly come back into the system and cause more damage than what you originally intended. There are a number of miticides, and I'm just going through. I have a pile next to my. I was actually doing this and not paying much attention because I'm looking for my mite cheat sheet, oh, here we go, which I wrote a number of years ago and probably should update. And that has all the products for all the crops kind of listed. And then it has, when you start to use actual miticides, they tend to be expensive and they each have their own foibles. So for instance, some may not kill eggs and the eggs can hatch and reinfest. With any miticide, you need good coverage. You can't just let things go. So someplace I'm looking here, and I'm not sure, they're probably posted on our field crop site. I have rating sheets for both soybean and corn. How do you can't count the mites. So how do you rate an infestation? And then I have these little cheat sheets that you can use to kind of select a product. But, again, just be really cautious when you spray mites, because once you spray, you want to spray as late as possible into the season, because you don't want to have to spray now 3 times with a very expensive product instead of just that one time. And as we head into
So,
August, we get into that juicier time of the year, that second or third week of August, we get those dewy kind of mornings. Those are the kind of times where, Marty's white mold is infecting whatever, but also, except for past flowering, and that's also where there's actual fungi that kill mites. So that's what we hope to get to, is that kind of stage.
so
Sorry, I
those mite
put it out
resources,
there.
do you have, are those online that you can drop a link for them?
I think they were on the team site, the field crop web, web website, but they probably need to be updated anyway. And I don't know what that link is. I'll have to find it here.
Phil just mentions that over in Sanilac County, he had 12 moths in one of his traps. So, um, So as long as we're here, any other specialists on this morning that had anything they wanted to share?
Good morning, Eric.
Hey, Lyndon, go ahead.
Hey, on the irrigation front, we're getting some rainfall, but corn and soybeans are creeping up there now. We need about an inch and a half, and very few places across Southwest Michigan have got that inch and a half in a week. When we have got it rainfall, it's been extremely scattered. So we're always hearing about the neighbor got all the rain. We do have situations where one neighbor gets an inch and a half and the next neighbor gets a quarter of an inch. So it's really important to have those rain gauges out there. There's a couple links in the chat about scheduling tools. If you're one of those people that hasn't invested in irrigation, be real considerate, really, and you're considering it, think about it this fall. Right now is not the time to try to build your irrigation system. We're a little too late, but I'd be glad to talk to you about new irrigation in the fall.
All right. Thanks, Lyndon. Also, if you haven't had a chance to look at the chat yet this morning, all of the different resources that Marty was talking about, links for those are in the chat. So please take a look at those. Any other specialists on this morning that had anything to share? I've got one more question for Marty too. All right. So Marty, talking about red crown rot, you mentioned that it's been in several, I think maybe up to 8 counties last year in Indiana. Can you talk a little bit about how it's spread? Has it spread through moving
Yeah.
soil or anything about that?
Yeah, so we do know there's been quite a bit of work done on red crown rot in Japan and some other Asian countries. It's been there for a few years, doing damage there on soybeans. So it produces sclerotia, somewhat similar to the white mold sclerotia, but we call them microsclerotia just because they're so small. They can survive in the soil for many years. And so contaminated soil is one way we do know that it can be spread. It does also produce two different spore types, but we don't really understand if that's involved in infection and spread. But certainly we don't want to be moving infested soil. So make sure if you are buying equipment, I mean, again, you should do this regardless because there might be weed seeds, nematodes, other pathogens you're bringing in. So don't go moving soil around, I guess. Clean off equipment between fields, especially between farms if you're buying new or used equipment. So
Okay, thanks. Do we have any educators on this morning who have anything to add to the discussion or any meetings you'd like to announce, anything like that?
Yeah, if I could. We have a seed treatment meeting coming up in person in Van Buren County on August 18th. So hope to see some Southwest Michigan folks there. There's also a seed treatment webinar series in August. It'll be every Tuesday in August from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. And again, love to have you on it.
All right, thanks, Nicole. And I see that Chris dropped a link for those spider mite resources. So go ahead and check those out. All right, I'm not hearing anyone else on this morning. So again, thanks everyone for joining. Be back next week to hear about planting cover crops after wheat. Have a great day.